Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to What's the Point podcast. My guest today is going to entertain you and enlighten you, amaze you, and he's going to give us some tips that are going to help us no matter what our role in life is. And yes, that's a real big introduction, but it's well-deserved for my good friend, John David Mann. Hello, John.
Hello, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Those are some big shoes to fill. You just painted for me.
Well, I realize that, and if I didn't know for a fact from my experience with you that you can fill those shoes, I wouldn't have brought that size shoe out for you to try on. So I know they fit. But for those that don't know John is one of the most fascinating people I've met for any number of reasons. His career, if you will, began as a preteen through early teen years as a concert level cellist and composer. And at the age of, I think, 13, John wrote a score for Prometheus Bound, I think, right? Which actually played in the original Epidaurus, Greece amphitheater, which is pretty amazing. At age 15, you received an award as a young composer. At age 17, you and your friends decided that you didn't really like the high school that you were in, so you got together and started a new one. And by the time you were 20, I was exhausted. So I could go on and on about all of the accomplishments of John, but suffice it to say that now John is most known for being a very prolific and talented writer. He has written books that have been translated into 35 languages, over 3 million copies sold. And what I find truly interesting, and I can't wait to hear some more about it, is the number of genres that your books cross, from business and leadership to life tips, if you will. And your latest venture, which I can't wait for, is your new coming out this summer called Steel Fear. How do you do that? Help us understand how you cross so many genres.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question, because crossing genres in writing is it's kind of similar to crossing fields with a career. Going from one field to another field to another field, which you look at someone like Michael Jordan. I'm not comparing myself to Michael Jordan, but you look at yourself, because I definitely do not play ball. But he's been a star in multiple sports, right? And you look at someone, how do they cross the boundaries? And I think that from the inside, it doesn't look so much like crossing boundaries. It looks like doing the same thing, just kind of with different inflections. So I started out, as you say, as a composer, cellist. I was an educator. We started a school. I became an entrepreneur. I built a sales organization, and then started, writing, and became a writer. Became really a ghost writer or an editor first, right? And then, from the editor's chair, it's kind of like, gradually moved into moved my chair a little closer to the author, and began ghost writing and then co-authoring, and now I'm in the author's chair. But it's all kind of one continuous game of pinball for me. Yeah. In terms of genre, part of that is that it reflects kind of my own changing interest. When I first got into writing 15 years ago, whenever it was, I was really in the world of marketing and sales and business and leadership. I'd been very big in the leadership world, and I was public speaking. And so leadership and business and that whole sphere, and then ghostwriting memoirs for people who were in that sphere, for a CEO of a company, for a president of a company. That was kind of a natural extension of the world I was in. But then my friend, of course, I planned, as you know, to be a screenwriter, and this man named Bob Burg came along and destroyed my career by asking me if I'd help him write this book. It was a parable. I loved writing The Go-Giver. I loved the experience of it. It was over a decade ago. It was actually 15 years ago that the actual writing started.
Okay.
And it's been on the market for a little over a decade. It took a few years to get it onto the market. I loved that process so much. And there are, as you know, a number of follow-up Go-Giver parables, the Go-Giver Leader, the Go-Giver Influencer. We've got one now that isn't published yet, the Go-Giver Marriage. And from there, I've done a few other parables, one with David Bach called The Latte Factor, one with Spencer Johnson called Out of the Maze. I've got another one in the hopper now, which isn't out yet. I love that form of telling a story that's a real story about real people. I mean, it's fictional, but there's dimension to them. They, you experience them as real characters, not just as cardboard cutouts. And so it's not, for me, a good parable isn't like a 5-minute morality tale or like an Aesop fable where you got a fox and you got a goose and you got a hen and you got a rabbit or whatever. Those are lovely. Yeah. But for me, a modern parable is kind of a fleshed out story. It's almost a mini novel. And it yes, it makes a point. Yes, it has lessons to teach, but speaking from the inside of the process, once you start writing a parable, you got to take the thing that you want to teach, set that to the side, and make the story and the characters your focal point. That's the heart of the story. You don't care about the lessons. You don't care about giving versus getting versus taking. You don't care about, giving value versus getting that. You don't care about any of that stuff when you put the book down. If the book didn't suck you in, if it didn't draw you, if you weren't involved in Joe and Pindar and Rachel and all these people. So getting into the parables with Bob kind of dipped my toe into the world of fiction. They're not classified as fiction, but they are. I mean, they're little novels kind of, right? Yeah. So that's gradually pulled me away from business books and how-to books and even memoirs and on finally toward full-fledged, full-feathered fiction. And so the thriller, Steel Fear, is coming out in July. It's I'm really excited about it. It's got a cover quote by Lee Child, who wrote the Jack Reacher books.
Very good. Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah. And he read it and loved it and said I won't even say what he says about it.
That's a heck of an endorsement because I'm sorry to speak over you. That's a heck of an endorsement because Lee Child's been known to have a little bit of success in this thriller book world, huh? Just a touch? Just
a little bit. He's done okay.
Good for you.
The Reacher boy, Mrs. Reacher's boy, Jack. It's actually not Mrs. Reacher, it's Mrs. Grant. But anyway, it was very, very exciting. He called it an instant classic, maybe an instant legend. And I was like so high for days after I heard that I could hardly fit through the doorway. So that's coming out in July, and we're already working the sequel, Cold Fear, which is coming out a year later. And it looks like I've gotten myself into a series, a thriller series. And it's funny. Yes, there's a serial killer. Yes, there's murder and mayhem. Yes, it's a mystery. Yes, it's all these things. But if you dig a little bit, scratch the surface, you're going to find leadership lessons in there, and lessons about value. And it's for me, writing Steel Fear isn't that different from writing The Go-Giver. It's just wearing a different set of clothes, and there's different rules of the road.
Well, John, first of all, thanks again for your time. I know how much time you spend writing. And so I appreciate you carving out some time to share with us your insights. Again, like I said at the intro, speaking with you is interesting to all of us, but it's also going to be educational and entertaining. But you've just said so much. First of all, let me touch on The Go-Giver because that's how we first met. Yeah. We met through your career destroyer, Bob Burg. I love that story. It's probably a good thing you didn't become a screenwriter because all of the gifts in your books wouldn't have happened. But obviously, I love The Go-Giver. I've got a bunch right here.
I see this. Yeah,
because I give them away because the whole Go-Giver franchise, 4 books, 3 of which are parables, are not just incredible business books. They're incredible life books. There are books that we can learn whether someone's in business or not. And those of you listening, if you've not read The Go-Giver, why not? And I urge you to do so. But check out the rest of the franchise too, because there's so much in The Go-Giver Leader and The Go-Giver Influencer, and Go-Givers Sell More. If you're in the business world, read Go-Givers Sell More. But of all the books you've written, you've covered so many. A lot of them, most recently, Steel Fear, have been written in conjunction with Brandon Webb, a former Navy SEAL, which has brought a whole new insight to you. And tell me how you came to know Brandon, and tell me, share with all of us how his influence helped you write the book Steel Fear.
There's something that Bob and I say in Go-Givers Sell More, and I'm glad you mentioned that and pointed that out, because to me it's like, you see the title, Go-Givers Sell More. Okay, it's a book about sales. And honestly, we poured our heart into that book. There's so much more than purely sales in that book. And I have the hope that lots of people who aren't professionally in the field of sales will also crack those covers, because there's stuff in there, as you say, about life. But one of the things we talk about in there is this idea of a law of left field. And the law of left field is not one of the 5 laws of stratospheric success. It's the 6th law, maybe. I don't know. It's a meta law. And it is that when you are focused on giving value, when you're focused on being true to your path and making a contribution to the world, you could say when you're focused on being yourself and doing the job you were put here to do and doing it well, then things will come to you that you could never have predicted or planned or prepared for. Well, no, I won't say that. You do prepare for them. You just don't know it.
Right.
You could never have planned or predicted. That will change your life, and it will be, better than any plan you could have made. My example is a screenwriting deal, right? That was my plan was screenwriting. Bob Burg came along as an agent of the universe saying, yeah, good plan. So let me tell you what we actually have in store. And that happens all the time. When you least expect it, things of great blessings will fall on you out of left field. And this is one of those. Back in 2009, I was working on Go-Givers Sell More, actually. And you remember Captain Phillips, that whole thing where his boat was captured by 3 Somalian pirates, and they held him, and eventually he became Tom Hanks and got saved.
That's right.
So in the actual pre-Tom Hanks event, these 3 snipers, famously fired these 3 simultaneous shots that took out these 3 pirates and saved Phillips' life, and boom, fodder for a Hollywood movie. So that week, everybody was glued to CNN all week watching the news about this event. And my literary agent, was watching television with her sister. And there was an interview. CNN, Don Lemon, I think, was interviewing a Navy SEAL sniper instructor who was talking about the training that these guys would have had. And she pointed at him and said to her sister, she pointed at the screen and said to her sister, I want that guy. Why can't I have that guy as a client? And then on Tuesday, 3 days later, that guy walked into our office and said, I need an agent. I want to write a book.
Really?
Yeah. And that guy, of course, was Brandon Webb. And so Brandon not only was a SEAL sniper, he was in one of the first platoons on the ground in Afghanistan after 9/11. And he went through SEAL sniper school. After Afghanistan, he went back came back home to the U.S., and he was tapped to direct a program to overhaul the sniper program, he and a friend, and he became the head instructor of the sniper program. So he has this vast array of experience, both in the field and theoretically, and in training and everything. And now he's an entrepreneur. He's in the entrepreneurial world. So my agent told him, she read his stuff. He'd written up a chapter and a proposal and some stuff. And she said, you're a good writer, but you need a really professional writer to write this with. And they called me and said, I know this isn't what you do, but you want to take a look? And I read 1 page of what Brandon wrote. Yeah. And Bill, I got chills. It was like the law of left field had just landed on me like a couch, like a television set, like a piano. And I said, yeah, I'm not, it isn't like I maybe want to do this. I have to do this. I'm in this. This is it. I'm in it. And I want to do this. So I got with Brandon an email, and in one of the first few exchanges we had, after I'd written a little bit and he'd seen what I was doing, he said, "Would you ever be interested in writing a novel?" And he laid out for me the premise of Steel Fear.
Oh, wow. That long ago.
Yeah, because the seed of the book came from an experience he actually had when he was on the USS Abraham Lincoln, this aircraft carrier, back in the 90s, before he was a SEAL. And he was a rescue swimmer and sonar operator in helicopters. And it was when they had just started integrating women into the crew of the carriers, the air crew. That's the flight crew, not the flight crew, but the actual air crew, the pilots.
Right.
And or integrating women at all, I guess, on the ship. And so it was a whole new thing culturally. And there was a serial predator on the ship who was reaching a hand in the doorway and flipping off lights and in the dark, groping women, attacking them, and then running away.
Oh,
and it was freaking people out, understandably.
Mm-hmm.
They never caught the guy.
Oh.
And to this day, I have no idea who it was. And eventually he stopped doing it, and life went on. But at the time, Brandon thought, "What if he killed them? What if it was a murderer?" Because they never had anything like that on the ship. So that was the premise he brought me, and I said, "God, I would love to do that someday." Well, someday, if you believe in someday, then someday turns into a day, and that day, is here.
So, and just to add a little bit to that story, the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first book that came out of your collaboration with Brandon was The Red Circle.
Yes.
Which is up here somewhere.
Oh, cool.
I saw it just earlier today. Great book, fascinating book. And yeah, so you've had other books with Brandon as well prior to Steel Fear.
The Red Circle was Brandon's memoir, and that was our first collaboration. It hit the New York Times bestseller list. I love that book. I had a blast writing that book. It was a huge project. And I think that at the time, I felt like it was one of the best things I'd worked on. We then did 2 more memoirs of Navy SEALs, basically. The second, Among Heroes, was a story of 8 different SEALs he'd known, one of whom was his best friend, Glenn Doherty, all of whom had died, either in the line in combat or in training or in various venues. Glenn was one of the 4 who died in Benghazi, famously, in the attack on the embassy there. And so we wrote about these 8 guys, Among Heroes. And then we did another book called The Killing School, which was a kind of a memoir about 4 different snipers: a SEAL, a Marine, a Ranger, an Army Ranger, and a Canadian infantryman, and of course Brandon makes 5. Yeah. And that was an enormous undertaking, that book. And then we said, I knew Brandon kind of wanted to write leadership books because he was out of the military when I met him, and he was already well into his entrepreneurial life, and he's got a multi-million-dollar business now, so media business. So we wrote a book called Total Focus, which was applying 7 principles from special forces, special operations, to the world of business and life. Yeah. And then a book called Mastering Fear, which title speaks for itself.
Yeah. And so Total Focus is another great book. It's also on the shelf here somewhere. I don't have Mastering Fear.
Mastering Fear was more successful than Total Focus, actually. Mastering Fear was our most successful book after Red Circle up to that point. Mastering Fear is a 5-step process. This is partially Brandon's life, and I also tap all my own experiences with fear, and we developed this sort of 5 stage map for stepping not away from things you're afraid of, but through them, and mastering fear, not conquering or avoiding or evading fear, not treating fear as an enemy, but how to harness fear to make it your ally.
Well, I can understand why that book has been so successful, because every one of us listening and hearing you talk, we all have fears.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can absolutely freeze us in our tracks.
Yes.
And being able to master that, like you said, not escape it, not evade it, and certainly not keep it from happening. But yeah, so that's a book I think all of us can read. Let me make just a quick comment here, sidebar. there's so much that we've talked about, John. There's so much in your life. You've accomplished so much. I want to make sure that all of our listeners understand that they can find out so much more about you by going to your brilliantly, newly redesigned website, johndavidmann.com. John David Mann, that's with two N's, M-A-N-N, johndavidmann.com. And on there, you can read his entire list of books, all of his blogs, which are fascinating. If I listed everything you've done, I would take an hour and a half just to introduce you. So everyone go to johndavidmann.com. It'll be worth the trip, I promise. Now then, back to John.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, we just launched that redesigned site, and the team who did this just, outdid themselves. I'm really, really happy with what they did. And of course, I suppose that we'll need to talk about the ebook on the site, but we'll get there to that. But did you want to say more about Brandon or about that whole series, where we are? But are we good?
Well, I just want this conversation to go wherever it goes. That's how I do it. But yeah, Brandon is an amazing story. The fact that you two have met each other seemingly from
totally different worlds, right?
Different worlds.
Right.
If the law of left field isn't at work for your agent seeing him on TV, for him just randomly walking into her office within a week, for you, it's all of that is just, we could talk about that all afternoon. But let me step away from Brandon and get back to the genre and the thriller, because writing, as you said, is writing to a certain degree, and it's how we apply our writing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And that kind of falls into line with what I talk about with knowing our purpose, and that's why I do this. What's the point? What's the point of what we do and why? We have to know our purpose first, and then fuel it with passion. And throughout your life, the various paths that you've gone in, is there something that you can share with us that you would point to as a primary purpose? Purpose does evolve over time, and it does shift over time, but it seems as though there's a common thread from what you've done. Is there anything to that? Let
me bounce off that for a second. Just say that, talking about different kinds of writing, different spheres of writing. Obviously, I write books that get published, so I'm a published writer. And not everybody listening to us right now necessarily is a published writer, but we're all writers. And I'm not being semantic. I mean, if you write blog posts, if you write community newsletters, if you write emails, if you write social media posts, right? I mean, for that matter, if you text people, it's all writing. It's all writing. Particularly if you write in any kind of form that has kind of a wholeness to it, a completion to it, like a blog post, a newsletter, a story, an article, and anything, which a lot of people do who don't consider themselves writers. So this applies to everybody, and that is, no matter what you're writing, business book, how-to, an article, a post, a novel, it tells a story. There's always a story involved. And a story, I talk about this in How to Write Good. There's a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's a story that has a hero or more than one hero who wants something and who either gets it or doesn't get it, and has a challenge, who overcomes it or doesn't overcome it. There's an arc, there's a shape, in other words, to the story. For me, story is a very musical thing. I always kind of hear it as music. That's my background. Those are my roots. But the point I'm making is that writing is storytelling, and storytelling is behind any kind of communication that you do. And you're right in that there's a purpose. You could say every story makes a point, whether it's a parable or a novel or a blog post. And in that sense, our lives are stories that we're telling. Every new day is a new page, even though it may look like it's already been written yesterday. No, it's still brand new, really. And so if your entire life is a story, then there's probably a point to that too. Here's the thing. Speaking as a writer, you don't always know what the purpose of it is when you start writing, or you don't always know what point you're making when you start making it. Often, Stephen King, the writer, says that often he talks about theme, this idea of big idea of theme. So what are the big ideas of your novel or your story? And he says often he doesn't even quite know what the themes are until he's in the second draft. And I find that very much to be true. I often don't quite know what I'm really getting at. I mean, I try to figure it out ahead of time. I think it would be great if I knew, but I don't always know. And I think that's true of our lives. I think it's true of our writing. I think it's true of the stories that we tell each other. I think that we're in a continual process of getting clear on, talk about total focus, about getting clearer on what is it we're really driving at here. And for me, just to answer your question directly, since I've filigreed all around it here, I've always had a fascination with taking things that are complex, that intrigue me, and reducing them, that's the wrong word, probably simplifying them or clarifying them or anyway, let's just say reducing. I'll go back to that. Use a cooking term. We'll reduce it in the pot, stirring on low heat, reducing it to a point where I could explain it to a million people, where people get it. I love the idea. people have said about The Go-Giver, and Bob and I have heard this thousands of times probably over the last decade plus, people who say, we don't very often hear people say, wow, the ideas in this book were so strange and different and new and something I'd never thought of. We don't hear that a lot. What we hear a lot of is, you know, that's how I always thought things were, but I never quite put it in those words. Bill, that is like music to my ears, because that's what I want to do. I want to tell people things they already know, but I want to put it in words so that they recognize it and say, oh, right. I knew that. Yeah. That's me. Yeah. That's me there. I get that. I never quite saw it in those words before, but now because I see it, I can like stand in it more. I'm clearer about it.
Yeah. And as a Go-Giver coach and speaker, I hear that as well. Yeah. And what I hear is there's nothing new in here. And I say, you're right. There's really nothing new in there. But have you ever seen or experienced it presented this way, and has it resonated with anyone? No, it's never been presented this way, and it resonates like crazy. I said, okay, that's the point. Yes. So let's move on, because again, I could talk to you for hours. You mentioned we talked about the website, and everyone should go to the website if for no other reason so that you can sign up to get a fabulous new ebook free from Mr. Mann. And it's called How to Write Good, or at least Gooder, which is just so John David Mann-esque.
I don't know what that is, but it must be, because I did it.
We all want to write better, and we're all interested in what's in that book. So share that with us, please.
Yeah, well, you know, as I was just saying a few moments ago, really, I think that, you know, there are those of us who make our living as writers, but there's everybody else who still uses words, puts words together to communicate their thoughts and feelings to other human beings. And that's what writing is. Yeah, the book's only been out for a couple of days as you and I are speaking and recording this. And I have a bunch of people who've written in saying, whoa, when I saw a free ebook, I was expecting like, a 15-page, 20-page, like, a special report. But no, it's a book, man. It's a full-size book. It's like size of the Go-Giver, Sell More plus a bit. So it's a full-size book. And I'll tell you I would tell you where you can buy it, but you can't. It's not on Amazon. It's not at Barnes & Noble. It's not anywhere but on my website. And so I wrote this book as a love letter to writing and to my readers, to people who read my stuff. And so I decided to write it and put it on my website as an ebook. And you can, when you go to the website, johndavidmann.com, you'll see a red button right by my head that says free ebook. And that's obviously it. So it's very simple to get and download. And what I did in the book was I started out with sort of a big picture of what it means, what writing is, what it means to be a writer, a little bit of my very personal experience. And I kind of I take you through. The goal of the book was to give you a glimpse behind the curtain of what it's like to write, at least for me. And so I walk you through my process of, when I talk about my Marty Crane chair, and there it is over in the corner, right past the painting. and the process of how I actually structure things and how I go from a vague idea that I just can't get my fingers around to stuff on the page. And then finally, I take a chapter where I start out with the first few pages of The Go-Giver, the original first draft, which is awful. I mean, I'm not being modest. It's awful. I'm telling you the truth. And I lay it all out there, and it wasn't easy to do, but I give you the book the way I first sent it to our agent, and then walk you through all the editing and changing and rewriting we did to turn it into something that you could actually sell to a publisher. And it's kind of a caterpillar to butterfly experience. Mm-hmm. I show you all that, and then in the last chapter, I break that down and show you how you can do the same thing with your writing. So that's the book, How to Write Good, or at least gooder.
And that's going to help every single person listening to this. So thank you for that. And I want to elaborate on a couple of things. First of all, a personal anecdote with you, my friend. I am a published author of one book. It's called Women Who Won. And it's a collection of blogs that I had written. Thank you. Actually, my wife came up with that, Tara.
Of course.
Speaking of women who won, she is a winner in life. So it's a collection of blogs that I'd written under my blog, Friday's Fearless Brands. But I had to write an introduction to it, just not the whole book at once, but just the introduction to it. And I wrote a chapter and I sent it to you and asked if you could perhaps consider, if you were of a mind, to give me a testimonial. And what I got back, we were actually in Chicago on a small holiday, and I got the email from you, and the subject line of the email was "Stop the presses" with about 17 exclamation points. And my first thought was, what the heck? And then I realized this is an international best-selling author who cares about me very much, and he's giving me his honest opinion. So when we write, we have to be open to getting suggestions, and we have to be open to realizing that it can get better. And when I wrote my blogs, I had my own personal editor, my wife, Tara. She would read them and say, this is good, but what if you said it this way? And she improved every single one of them. And what that leads me to is back to your chair there in the corner, because there's at least two more things I want to talk to you about. The chair and then something on a blog post you published not too long ago about your darlings. So you write in one chair and then you review and self-edit differently?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot in the book, but in brief, for me anyway, and I think this is pretty broadly true, there's two different mental states here involved. There's the state of, and you could call them right brain and left brain, because they kind of are. There's the state of, you call it creativity or creation, or the state of drafting, writing something, which for me is very difficult. It's like pulling out of the air an idea that kind of doesn't only half exist, or doesn't quite exist yet, but kind of getting it and getting onto the page. And frankly, it's starting. It's getting the first thoughts on the page, whether it's the first thoughts for a chapter or a blog post or a book or whatever it is. That getting stuff started, drafting new material, for me is the hardest part of the process, even though it produces the smallest amount of output. Mm-hmm. I go sit in a chair. I can't do it at my computer. I can't do it hunched over a desk. I go sit in that easy chair, my Marty Crane chair, I call it. And I got a pad of paper and a pen and a cup of hot tea or whatever. And I kind of let my mind wander. And I have a topic I'm thinking about, or I have an idea, or whatever. And it's almost like meditation, or either that or wool gathering or something. And I just kind of, and I sort of wait, honestly, for something to click. It's almost like a safecracker feeling tumblers and waiting to hear the click with his fingers. Okay. So wait for something to kind of make sense and for an idea to form.
It's that kind of analogy that makes your writing so fabulous. Sorry, I just had to say that. What a beautiful picture of what you're doing.
It helps me too. Analogies help me. So I'm sitting there out there with my fishing line. I'm waiting for a nibble. And then, in a 2.5 hour session, I rarely do that for more than 2.5 hours, maybe only an hour, hour and a half. I might get a couple lines, a paragraph. I might fill a page. I might, as much as fill one page of a sheet, but that's rarely more than that, and often not that much. Then I'll take that later that day to my computer, which I'm holding right here at my actual desk, sit at a desk chair on my laptop, and I'll transcribe my notes into the computer. And then my left brain starts working and I start expanding and stretching and changing and editing and so forth. But here's the key point. Most writers, from my observation, most potential writers, aspiring writers, smother themselves in the cradle by being too critical while they're writing, in the writing process. You can't edit yourself while you're writing. It's two different mindsets. It's like stepping on the gas pedal and the brake pedal at the same time, or going and drive and reverse at the same time. You've got to write unfettered, with the ankle weights off, just barefoot, running in the grass, just write what it is you're writing, and then go back to it later, whether that means later today or tomorrow or next week, however long it takes to separate emotionally from what you've done. Go back to it with a critical eye and say, let me see. Oh my, who wrote this drivel? And then figure out, what are the gems in there? What's worthwhile that's in there? And what's dross, what is unnecessary? So I've discovered over the years, I needed two physical places where I did those two different things.
I love that. And doing it that way, the image I just got is it's kind of like being a mentor to yourself, because when I speak to mentors, you're one, Bob Burg is one, my wife is one. I'm blessed with a lot of people that I can go to for advice. They can give me advice. You can give me advice because you're not emotionally attached to what I'm talking about or what I'm doing or what my challenge is. So it's kind of like, when you step away for an hour or a day or however long from your ideas, and then you come back and say, are there nuggets or are there clods of dirt? It's because you're able to detach a little bit emotionally. Is that fair?
It is fair. And it's there. I said that the tendency to be critical while you're writing kills most aspiring writers. There are two things that really get in the way of people being the writers they could be. The first is trying to edit while you write. You write a paragraph or a page, you say, this is terrible, this is awful. And you throw it away, you try again, you say, oh, this is drivel I'm writing. And you smother it while you're writing it. You never let it out of the bottle. The other thing that kills writers is the inability to take the critique, what you were talking about earlier. Having cultivating the ability to take critique unemotionally with an open mind from qualified sources. And that's important. That doesn't mean like your next door neighbor and the UPS guy is going to come and tell you what's good and what's not. You should listen necessarily. The inability to take critique has ruined many careers and ruined many books that I've seen. And so it's really important to let yourself write. It's also really important to take good critique, once you're finished.
Yeah. So in my example with you, John, what I had to do was detach my emotional connection, because the start of my book, the initial chapter, which ended up being 2 sections rather than 1, from some brilliant advice I was given, but it had to do with my mother. So I was really attached to that.
Yeah, man.
And so, it
personal stuff, man.
It took me a minute to digest.
And you should be. And that's the thing. In fact, you have to be. If you're not really attached to your writing, and you're not writing honestly, I mean, even if you're not writing about your mother, even if you're writing about, how to do public speaking, you want to be really attached to that because it means something to you. It's from you. So you should be attached to it. So you're absolutely right. And being able to step back, only way you can hear the critique.
And that's where passion and my passion and my purpose principle, that's where passion drives our purpose, because you were so excited about your music. You were so excited about the high school, which is a whole different story, which is fascinating. Sending people to some of the most prestigious universities in the country from a school started by you and some other high school students that wanted to learn more. The passion you put into business and the passion you put into writing, that's what makes the magic. But being able to put that passion on the side and really get in touch with the purpose of what is this intended to do. And that brings me to the other thing I referenced a few minutes ago that I want to hear you talk about. And it's not just understanding if it's good writing or less than good writing. It's also a question of, is it appropriate to use here?
Yeah.
And you wrote a post the other day that just floored me. I've read it a couple of times. And it's called "Murder Your Darlings."
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to let you explain that to all the listeners, because I promise I will not do it justice.
Well, among writers, certainly it's a famous quote, and I've forgotten the name at the moment. Quigley, forget the name of the guy who first said it. Was one of the compilers of the Oxford Book of Poetry, but he basically said that you have to be prepared. This has been repeated by Hemingway and everybody. In the service of good writing, you need to be prepared to what they call slay or murder your darlings, meaning you need to be prepared to delete or edit out passages that you thought were fantastic, that might even be fantastic. It would be the same thing if you were a film director and you have to edit out scenes that were like, oh my God, this is like a great scene. But it doesn't serve the larger purpose. And while I was writing about that in the book, what hit me was, I was thinking, you can't fall in love with your own writing. It's dangerous to fall in love with your own writing. And then I thought, that's not honest, because I am in love with some of this stuff. Like I pick up the Go-Giver, like you mentioned, the leader or the influencer. I love these characters. It's okay to be in love with your writing. It's kind of like if you're an entrepreneur, it's okay to be in love with your business. In fact, it's kind of mandatory. But as a writer, you have to be in love with the story more than with your writing. What that means is, if a certain passage or a certain chapter or a certain point you're making, or even just a certain description you put in, or whatever it is, if a certain piece of the writing doesn't serve the larger story, doesn't move it forward, doesn't serve the goal of the story, if it's in the way, you may have to just take it out. And that's what, every good film director knows that. They've taken out scenes simply because they impeded the progress of the story they were telling. And it's funny, here we are, it's Thursday as you and I speak. And this morning I was stuck in a thorny plot problem in Cold Fear, the sequel. And I took my dog Finn for a walk. And as I was walking the block, I realized, oh, this whole scene, I had this terrifying character who comes into the story. And on the day he comes in, I had this terrifying scene that I drafted in my head and had partly on paper, which I realized was really a cool scene, and it had to go. Because it threw a wrench in the gears of the story. It stopped the forward motion of the story. It made the story veer off in the wrong direction. Good comics know that. Good raconteurs know that. Good blog writers know that. I promise you, Malcolm Gladwell knows it. Seth Godin knows it. So there are times where you have this really, really great stuff. And it could be true for a business. You could have a really cool idea for a product you want to introduce into your line, but line extension can be a quicksand when you're an entrepreneur. Sometimes if you have a great line of women's clothes and you suddenly have this brilliant idea to create this little line of doggy clothes, think, oh my God, but it uses the same aesthetics. It would go perfectly with the others. And I even got this cool pun name for it. And then your mentor says, yeah, that's just really not going to work. You're going to actually cut into your sale. People are going to say, well, what the hell is this going on here? You have to, as an entrepreneur, often let go of some of your cherished ideas in service of the business, in service of your market and your clientele.
And that's a great example, as all of your examples are. But I think a key point to make here is, when it says murder your darlings, it's not murder them and put them away. It's sometimes it's cut them from here and put them on the shelf, because the right time will come along.
Of course, as you know, I had an example of that.
Yeah.
And so I had this one passage in the book Mastering Fear. I had this passage, that I'd written that was based on an experience of Brandon's about being underwater, diving under a ship, and how easy it is to get chopped into fish food if you get sucked into the motor because someone forgot to turn it off, the bilge pump, really. And it didn't fit. It was a great example of something but the something it was a great example of wasn't the point I was making in the book. And I literally moved it from place to place about 4 times, looking for a home for it. I heard myself say numerous times, Bill, I can't let go of this. I got to put it somewhere. There was no place to put it. And so finally I took it out, but I saved it in a file. And I was near the end of writing Steel of Fear. And I had this ending of the whole first part of the book that I thought was brilliant, which I write about in that blog post. Yep. And my editor's like, dude, this doesn't work. And I said, what do you mean this has to work? It has to work. I love it. It's my favorite part. And I realized I had to take that piece out. And these passage that I had yanked from Mastering Fear fit right there, like a hand in a glove. And I was like, wow. Years later, I found a place for my darling. So
good.
So you never know. You never know.
So I guess it would be horrible to say if the glove don't fit, you put it on the shelf and bring it back later.
It might be horrible to say that, but what can I say? The shades of OJ, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. John, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your talent. Thank you for sharing all of the goodness that you have and all of the brilliant ideas that come from that chair and from walks with Finn and from walks with the beautiful Anna, the misses in your life. Thank you for all of the insights you've given us today. For myself and everyone listening, thank you. We've all learned. I would bet that people that are listening to this, either driving or walking, are going to go back and listen to it when they can sit down and take notes. They might want to look at it on the YouTube channel either way, but you've enriched us quite a bit, and I appreciate that. I'm going to encourage everyone to go to johndavidmann.com just to check it out, because there's so much there. Get your book free, only available at that website, of How to Write Good, or at least gooder. And if you've enjoyed this and you've gotten something from it, like I have, I invite you to share it. Subscribe to the What's the Point podcast if you're so moved, and share the episode with people that this will help. Because as John said, we're all writers. We can all write at some point good, or at least gooder. John David Mann, thank you.
You are a gracious host, sir. Thank you so much for creating this magnificent platform. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I look forward to speaking again soon.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.